you for coming along. It's really great to have so many people here to listen to talk about soil. I have to start by saying that I'm not a soil scientist or a pedologist, as they're sometimes known as, but I've always had a great interest in soil, and it is something that, as a child, I always liked getting mucky and getting out and getting my hands into the soil and smelling it and just seeing what's living in it. Um, tonight we're going to cover quite a few things, which would, if you were talking to a soil scientist, would probably take a week to cover. But we're just going to have a quick look at what is soil, what's it made of, and who lives in it, why it's so important, and some of the main threats to it. And also just at the end, a little bit about what we can do to help, because it is such an important ecosystem. And if you ask most of conservationists or people, to name some of the main natural habitats that we have, they're going to name oak woodlands, maybe bogs, species-rich grassland. But how many of us would actually think about naming soil as a habitat? I know it doesn't usually figure in any of those questions. And if you're like me and you enjoy gardening, you may have a bit of an idea of what the soil's like in your garden or in your area. And if you're a farmer, you're going to know a lot more about soil because your livelihood depends on it. Do you have clay soil that when you walk through it, your wellies get heavier and heavier until you can hardly lift them off the ground? Or is it nice sandy, dry soil, but then if it dries out too quickly, you have to keep watering it? Or if you've got the holy grail of soil and you've got nice loam-based soil, and then it's much easier to work with. This first picture really is just a couple of things that you might see in the soil, because soil tells such a story. On the left there, we've got little badger prints. So that's the right hand footprint is its front foot, and the left hand foot is his back, or the left hand print is his back foot. So it's got smaller, bigger feet at the front than it has at the back. And then on the right there, that's an earthworm poop. So you've probably seen those if you've been out cutting grass. This is my soil in my garden. I live right beside an old quarry, and I think I could have quarried my garden quite easily because it's absolutely full of this sort of shaly stone stuck together with clay. So it's not that easy to dig a hole in my garden. Um, but there's other things that we think about with soil. It's not just what it looks like this. It's the pH, is it acidic soil? Um, can you grow lots of heathers and bilberry and azaleas? Or is it alkaline soil? And in that case, you're probably growing supersized cabbages and leeks because they do really well in more alkaline soil. But generally, that's most people's the breadth of their knowledge is it stony? Is it dry? Is it acidic? And we don't really think about what's in the soil. But according to recent research, 59% of the world's species live in or depend upon the soil. And that's, a huge number of creatures, and they're only beginning to scratch the surface of that. If you're more interested in finding out about soil in your area, you can go and look online. There's been lots of soil surveys done in Northern Ireland, and the TELUS project, TELLUS, is a great resource for looking up, what the bedrock is in your area, and all the minerals and things that you can find. So it's really a bit of a treasure trove. But just before we get going any further, we're going to do a little poll, just to get you thinking about your own soil. Just be interesting to see if you know what texture your soil is. So there's lots of different aspects of soil, but we're just going to look at the texture. So is it sandy? Is it kind of like very well drained and um light? Is it clay? Is it big heavy clay that's very fertile but hard to dig and gets waterlogged? Or are you one of the ones that are lucky to have loam? Or is it silty soil, which is quite small particles as well, but better drained than clay? Or do you not know? So yeah, there's no right or wrong answers. You just fire ahead there and let's see what we've got. And Kirsty's gonna knob them up. What we can say, I can say them. I think we're just about there, are we, Kirsty? So
I think so. It's still going up a little bit. So we've got 40 responses out of 46. Obviously, there's no pressure to do the poll. 41. I'll give it 10 more seconds for anyone that wants to give us their soil. 43 out of 46. Okay. I will end the poll now, but hopefully you can see that, Rosemary, can't you?
I can read them out.
Oh,
Yes, there's
perfect.
yeah, so clay tops the poll. So we've got 67% have got clay soil. Really good, very fertile soil, holds its nutrients well, but can be very, very hard to dig and does get waterlogged. Sandy soil, we're down at 7% there. Low is 16%. So there's all those the gardeners that can dig their soil or farmers that have good soil for growing crops. And no one on the silty soil. And just 9% have no idea. So I'm very impressed actually because I thought probably that would have been a lot higher. Um, but yeah, there's your homework. For those of you who don't know what sort of soil you have, get out and have a wee dig around and see what it's like. So yeah, you can end the poll there, Kirsty. Thanks very much, everybody. Shall we share the results? Can we do that? I'll check it anyway. There we go. Okay. Can you click out of that, Kirsty?
Has it disappeared from everyone else's screen? It's disappeared on mine.
It's still on mine.
Oh,
Yep.
oh.
Still on mine.
Um, Not sure why it doesn't want to disappear because it's gone on my end of things, but
It's just I need to move forward, so I'm not sure.
It's gone off mine.
mm, yeah, I mean the polls ended on my end of things, and when I can just close it.
Is it closed, Kirsty? Because I can't.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not closing on the other end of things.
Sorry, folks, I can't move forward here.
Let's
Oh, there we
see.
go. Ta-da!
Oh, is it working now?
It's working now.
Oh,
Yes.
perfect. It was maybe just slow to react, but it definitely was closed on my end of things.
Yeah. So this definitely isn't Northern Ireland today. Um, this is, I suppose, a representation of what the planet looked like for most of the time it's been spinning around the sun. Um, soil is only something that's actually appeared in the last sort of 10% of our planet's history. For most of the time, it was rocky, barren, dry, dusty, nothing growing on it. And it was, as time went on then, and plants, very basic plants started to appear, which would have been originally mosses, would have been the first to appear. Little thin soils started to form. And then over time, as plants evolved, the roots got longer and they were able to penetrate down into the ground. And that's really when soil formation took off. But at that time, then the Earth's atmosphere was very rich in carbon dioxide. But when the soil really started to form, it absorbed all that carbon and the temperature of the Earth came down. So it's quite interesting that, in this time we talk a lot about climate change, that this has happened with the formation of soil is when the Earth started to cool and absorb the carbon. So I don't think I'd like to live in a pit like that. It's very nice. So soil. So what is it? When we were growing up, we didn't call it soil, we called it mold. I don't know if that was a County Armagh thing. But I can remember my, parents saying to me, "Oh, get the wee flower pot there and put some mold into it and plant the seed." I never hear people calling soil mold nowadays, but maybe that was just an older term for it. It often gets called dirt or earth or dust or whatever. But it's usually has these main 5 ingredients. So the minerals, they come from the rocks. Then you've got organic matter, which is from dead plants and animals, gases, water, if you're living in a temperate climate like ours, and then microorganisms and other life forms. So the minerals, the rocks will influence your pH. So if you're living in an area that, say, has granite rock or basalt, the soil tends to be more acidic. Whereas if you're living in somewhere that is carboniferous rock like limestone, the pH will be higher and it will be more alkaline. So it's the rock that really mainly affects the pH. And the loam soils, as I said, the loam soils are the best soils for growing crops, and they're about 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay. So the organic matter will be made up of plants and animals, and some soils are nearly all organic matter. So that's where your peat is. Peat is a very organic, rich soil. It's made from dead sphagnum moss, and it takes a very long time to form. So you're looking at, a meter depth of peat takes about 1,000 years to form. So we can wreck it very quickly, but it takes us a long time to get it back. And peat has hardly any nutrients in it. So if people who buy like peat-based compost, there will have to be nutrients added to that, or your plants won't grow. The plants that do grow on peat bogs are very adapted for living in that sort of soil that doesn't have much nutrients. Like things like the little sundews, which are insectivorous plants, and they need to get the nutrients in from the insects. So that's why ammonia is so hard on our peat bogs, because ammonia is a nutrient, and when it reaches the bogs, it can actually kill the mosses because it's too nutrient rich. This is another type of soil altogether. This is salt marsh. So it's very rare in Northern Ireland. Actually, there's very little salt marsh here, but it's obviously a very waterlogged soil, very tiny particles in it, very anaerobic, and you've got those anaerobic bacteria living in it, which give it that really distinctive pong that's quite a lot of salt marshes have. Beautiful and very important for wildlife as well. So any of us who studied geography at school or college or horticulture, you'll have heard of these soil horizons. We used to do them in school, which is basically like a cross section down through your soil. So this is actually a soil horizon from the beach in County Mayo. And in County Mayo, there's a lot of blanket bog, and the blanket bog comes right down to the sea. So in most other places, blanket bogs is found on high mountains and so on. But here, because it's so wet, it comes right down and meets the sea. So you can see there at the top, you've got the grass, and you can just about make out the grass roots, and that's the topsoil bit. And that's where most of the activity will be in the forms of animals, microbes, bacteria. They'll be in the topsoil. And then you've got subsoil, which is usually a paler color. It's harder, it's more dense, it's not as nutrient rich, but it still serves an important process because it's supporting the topsoil, and it kind of deals with the water flow in the soil. And then normally you get the bedrock below it. So this particular soil horizon is how you've got your topsoil at the top, just a wee bit. Then you've got a layer of black peat. And then below that, that's glacial tills. So that's where, when the glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age, it deposited all this sort of sand and soil and stones and rocks. And then further below that, you'll be getting into your bedrock. So I'll show you another soil horizon. This is quite close to where I live. It looks quite different again. So this is in a woodland, and some of this rock would have been quarried. So this is where you're getting that sort of quarry face. So the topsoil at the top where the tree is just about clinging on there. And then not very far below that, you'll see the paler soil, and that's your subsoil. And then you're straight into the bedrock, which is like a shale here. It's a shale anyway. There's big lumps of quartz running through it. Yeah, so you've got your different types of rocks, including your sedimentary rocks, your metamorphic rocks, which have been changed by heat, and the igneous rocks, which are the lavas and magmas that's come out of the volcanoes. So who's who in the soil? Now, most of our soil here in Northern Ireland has been changed. It's been modified. It's been ploughed. It's been, had fertilizer put on it, or slurry, or manure, or the crops that we grow in it have modified it. But this is some soil from a grazed field. You can see the worms there, the earthworms. We're going to talk about those later. And you might be able to make out a wee grub there. So about halfway up on the right-hand side, that's a leather jacket. So leather jackets are really common in the soil, and they're the larvae of crane flies or daddy longlegs. So at a certain time of the year, they'll make their way up to the surface and they'll pupate and off they go. But they're very important food for birds and for lots of other things. So in the soil, as I said, the world soil is very important, grows about 95% for crops. 90% of fungi live in the soil, 85% of plants, and more than 50% of bacteria in the world live in the soil. So, and they're not all bad bacteria, of course. 1 teaspoon of healthy woodland soil can contain up to 10 billion living organisms. So that's more than all the people on Earth in 1 teaspoon of soil. Now, not all soil will have that many, but some of the best, probably forest soils, would be the richest. Incredible. So let's look at some of the characters that are living there. This is my favorite. This is a tardigrade. I was finding it difficult to find a photograph of the tardigrade, but we actually have a tardigrade ornament in the Ulster Wildlife offices. So I borrowed that for this purpose, and then I did find another photograph. But, their motto is, I will survive. They're sometimes called water birds. Another name for them are moss piglets, which I think is a very cute name. And they've been around for 530 million years, virtually unchanged. So they find them in fossil records going back a long way to the Precambrian era. They are probably the most resilient animal on the planet, and they can survive for up to 30 years without food and water. And it can completely dry up, not any moisture in them at all. And it's a process called cryptobiosis. And when they turn into that state, they're known as a TUN, T-U-N. And they can survive up to 30 years in that state. We've been taken into space. And there was, in the International Space Station, they shipped up frozen tardigrades in 2021. So they're frozen on Earth, sent up to the International Space Station where they were thawed out and then exposed to solar radiation. So it's like, let's really test these poor wee guys out. And they were able to survive 1,000 times more units of radiation per unit weight than a human could survive. So they're 1,000 times more resilient to radiation than we are. And then another experiment exposed them to the vacuum of space for 10 days, and 50 to 60% of them came out of that alive as well. So they're total the superheroes. They've been found at the bottom of ocean, tops of mountains. They live in all different types of habitat, but soil is one of the main places we will find them. And they are here in Northern Ireland. They're just less than a millimetre in size, so they're just about visible. And certainly if you put some soil under the microscope, you'll probably see them there. But yeah, incredible. And remember, life gets tough. You can always shrivel up into a ball and just wait it out. And I was delighted last year, the Guardian newspaper had a competition called Invertebrate of the Year, and one species of tardigrade won that. So it was the winner of the Guardian's 2025 Invertebrate of the Year. So remember the tardigrades. If all else fails in this crazy planet at the minute, hopefully the tardigrades will make it through. Then we've got earthworms, which I'm sure you all love earthworms. They're really, really important. And they were known as the engineers of the soil. I think there's around about 28 species now being recorded in Ireland. There's a lot more interest being taken in them. The Earthworm Society has been out doing surveys on CEDAR as well. And they went to Baloo wetlands, one of our nature reserves, and they found most of the earthworms they were expecting there. So that was really good. Some of them are, they're very deep burrowing earthworms. They bury down into the soil. They live in permanent burrows and they just go up and down vertically. So they come up to the surface, grab a leaf or something and pull it down into the soil. Other species live just below the surface and don't tend to come out onto the surface, and they're feeding on, debris in the soil. And then you've got others that live in compost and humus. So the smaller one there, you can see the dark red one, that's known as a tiger worm. It's a composting earthworm. So I've got those in my compost heap. And then the bigger ones there are some of the more deeply burrowing ones. But earthworms are so important for everything else. You've got frogs, shrews, badgers, hedgehogs, and a lot of birds will eat earthworms. So they're very, very important. And they also contribute to soil aeration. So they're kind of a nature-based solution for flooding. But one which was called the common earthworm, and used to be quite common, Lumbricus terrestris, has now been made a Northern Ireland priority species. And in recent surveys, these haven't really been turning up. So, they're quite worried about what's happened with this earthworm. And it's probably due to the effects of the New Zealand flatworm. But fertilizers and pesticides and regular ploughing will also kill earthworms. I knew a farmer who he was telling me that he had spread his field with artificial fertilizer, and he went out the next morning and all the worms were up on the surface dead, and he was quite devastated by that because he knew how important they were. He lived very close to Lough Neagh, so he really needed them to aerate the soil. So there's some of the threats. There's the New Zealand flatworm, which was in my garden. That's it on the left. These are an invasive species that have come in probably in the 60s and 70s on plant material or plant pots. They've made themselves at home. And what they do is that they go out and find earthworms and sort of cover them and ooze digestive juices onto them and then absorb it. So it's a pretty nasty way to go for old earthworm. Compaction and disturbance, you can see there in the middle, that's quite a common sight on development sites or whatever here. You get a lot of compaction, and then of course spraying things as well. Here's a wee tip for you. If you're out having a look at earthworms, you can actually tell if they're an adult or a juvenile. And in that one, if you can see, you'd see the head end is towards the bottom, and just a wee bit past the head, you've got like a yellowish band around it, and like a little belt, a little yellow belt, and that shows that that's an adult earthworm, because that's part of the reproductive organ in the earthworm. So that's an adult. So if they don't have that, they're juvenile. So here's a tip for you. So some of the other things that live in soil and are very common are springtails. So these are really abundant, and you probably have seen them. If you get down close to the soil and you poke your finger in, you'll see things hopping about, and those are the springtails. So they're eating a lot of different materials. They eat fungi, they eat algae, they eat bacteria, and they recycle the nutrients back into soil. And they also spread beneficial fungi. So they spread that fungi from one plant to another, which helps them to survive. Protozoa. So protozoa are more microscopic. You not see these without the help of a microscope. And they eat bacteria. They live in the water in the soil, so they'll not live in very dry soil. And they're consuming the bacteria and releasing nitrogen, which helps plants to grow. And then we have nematodes. So they reckon that nematodes are probably the most numerous creature on Earth. There's so many of them. And we're talking about teaspoons of soil quite a lot, but in a teaspoon of soil, you could expect to see about 500 nematodes. So it really makes you think, when you look at soil, you think, oh, it's just an inert material. It's just dead. It's just brown stuff that you grow stuff in. But it's actually as much alive as anything else. You're actually handling, wildlife when you're working with soil. And nematodes help to decompose organic matter. Some of them are parasitic on plants, and some of them are involved in nutrient cycling. But anyway, they're very numerous. And then fungi. Fungi have just really, they've become something that has really captured people's imaginations, because the more we find out about them, the more amazing, they are. They're key drivers of the soil health, and they decompose plant material. They break down lignins and cellulose in the wood. They use enzymes to do that. They stick the soil together, and they're acting like this term, the wood wide web. So through the mycorrhiza under the ground, they're acting like a network channel to help trees communicate with each other, and trees to uptake nutrients. They say that a teaspoon, again, of woodland soil contains about a kilometre of fungal threads. This one is an amethyst deceiver in some deciduous woodland in Plantiana. It's beautifully fungi. So we've talked about quite a lot of different organisms that you can see in the soil, but just consider this for a moment. I was reading that scientists believe that only 1% of microorganisms in the soil have been identified so far. So we're really only just beginning to think about how important they are. And most of our food production relies on it. 95% of our food is grown in the soil, but we're losing it faster than it can be made. We're losing it 10 to 40 times faster, depending on where you are in the world. And these soils contain more carbon than all the plants, all the forests, and all the atmosphere. So, by losing soil, we're losing that great ally in terms of carbon capture. And they also hold a lot of water and retain more water than all the UK lakes and rivers combined. So that's another quite amazing fact about them. And then, of course, peat extraction, we know the effect that is having. So the number one threat to soils in the world is erosion. So this can be through water, which is probably the main way it's eroded here, or it can be through drying out and just dries out and blows away. You can see in the middle there's soil erosion. It's oozing down into a stream, which is very bad. Just bare soil, it's just not stable enough to hold itself together, so it tends to just wash away. And you think about the amount of soil that's being eroded on the planet, billions and billions of tons every year. And someone sort of broke it down into a way that we can really appreciate how much that is. So for every meal, so if we eat 3 meals a day, every person on the planet, for every meal that every person eats, there's 9 kilograms of soil lost to erosion. So that's a bucket's full of soil every time you have a meal. If you just can imagine that the volume of that across the planet. So it is the number one threat. There's some erosion here in Northern Ireland, just with a heavy rain, and that looks like a new field of ryegrass has been sown. Because the soil is quite bare, it's been exposed to the rain, and it's just washing away. And not only is the farmer losing soil, which is very important, and losing a lot of that grass, because this is right across the field. This is happening. It's not just one strip, but that is also carrying nutrients down into the river, which then is flowing into Lough Neagh in this particular case. So that's how Lough Neagh gets a lot of its nutrients, is actually through eroded soil. And this isn't Northern Ireland yet. This is desertification, where basically agricultural land just turns to desert. And it's caused by, poor husbandry methods, cutting down trees, compaction, overgrazing, and huge areas of the planet are now suffering from this. So Australia, China, North Africa, in many different areas, this is what you're beginning to face. And once it becomes like this, it's very, very hard to get it back because you need to get that carbon back into it again. You need to get the humus back in, and it's very difficult to do that. Pollution, a lot of our soils are getting polluted through mining, application of pesticides, heavy metals, plastics, waste disposal, airborne ammonia, and even you think of the effects of war. You know, we're very conscious now of what's going on across the planet. There's all that sort of physical disturbance of the soil, but also, you know, chemicals and heavy metals and so on. So really, really bad for wildlife and really, really bad for people as well. Salinization is another problem. That's where irrigation can lead to the soil becoming quite salty, and you know, rising sea levels will have that effect as well. And then compaction and poaching. So poaching is where animals are repeatedly standing or walking over a particular part of the field, and they lead to this sort of ur soil and bit of waterlogging there. You can see where the feeder was probably an animal feeder there in that green patch, and they were all coming around to feed from it, and just made a bit of a mess there. Another big problem is sealing. It's known as soil sealing. So where you put concrete or tarmac over the soil and basically just seal it in, and it can't function because it hasn't got the oxygen, it's not getting water, it's not getting nutrients coming in. And the Royal Horticultural Society have been looking into this, and they found that more than half of all Britain's front gardens are now paved over. More than half of the gardens are paved over. And 3 million were paved over between 2005 and 2025. So it's happening really, really quickly. People don't have time. You know, they're in a rush. They can't be bothered doing any gardening. And I suppose the incentive isn't there for a lot of people to grow their own vegetables, whereas in the past, every little square inch of soil was being used for vegetable growing in your garden. It's just, we don't do that now. And another quite astounding figure is that 7.5 million square meters of private gardens now are covered in artificial grass. So that's another thing. And that's plastic, basically. So it kind of wrecks the soil a bit, this. It also leads to heating. You know, urban areas being very hot with all this tarmac and concrete, and it adds to the runoff. So instead of water running down into the soil and being absorbed, it runs off and causes more flooding. So what can we do? How can we help? Right, for start off, we all know that we should be buying peat-free compost. If that's what if we need some compost, make sure it's peat-free, or make your own. This was a compost heap that I had at one stage. Mine's not quite as big as this anymore, but it was producing huge amounts of compost, and everybody was coming, all my friends were coming with their trailers to come and get some more. I had leaves in one bed, I had grass clippings in the other, and then was mixing them together. So I had access to all these great ingredients to make compost. Don't use pesticides or herbicides. Leave your soil as undisturbed as possible. Just try and let natural processes occur. And then leave your leaves on the surface to let the worms and the other invertebrates eat them. If you really, really can't live with leaves on your lawn, then put them into the side, into the flower beds, or pile them up somewhere and let them develop into compost. So compost is great. And then just sort of to finish off, we're looking at regenerative farming principles. So I suppose in the past, this would have been the norm for a lot of farmers because they didn't have access to a lot of the equipment or the chemicals that or fertilizers that farmers would have now. But the principles of regenerative farming is that, don't disturb the soil unless absolutely necessary. So that will preserve those wormholes, because remember, a lot of those wormholes are permanent features for the worms. It preserves the fungi, it preserves the air pockets, and then keep the soil surface covered. So things like heavy rain, frost, and hot sun can harm the soil, but keeping it covered with some sort of crop will protect it. Keep living roots in the soil. Now that's difficult in arable rotation, but living roots are vital to feed the creatures that are in the soil and the bacteria and fungi. Growing a diverse range of crops, and ideally at the same time. So companion cropping, where you're growing two crops together and then separating them after harvest. Or cover cropping, which is if you have a field that you're not going to use for a crop, and grow something in it, and at least it'll keep the soil covered, and it can also help to provide nutrients, depending on what you're planting. And if you're bringing in grazing animals, use herbal lays for them to feed on. So these lovely Jersey cows are eating, looks like chicory there. And this is also great for the animals. It keeps them really, really healthy to have a good variety of plants to eat. And it supports pollinators. That's what a herbal lay can look like. Isn't that just fantastic? You've got your leguminous plants, your plants from the pea family. There's like clovers there. You've got your brassicas, which are great for the animals to eat. The wee purpley flower, the pale purple flower is Phacelia. It's a good green manure plant, and it's also great for pollinators. So imagine cattle just going in and munching on that. Would be delighted, wouldn't it? Be really tasty stuff. So that's it. Just soil in a nutshell, really. And thank you all for listening. This is a wee cockchafer, which also spends most of his life in the soil. And if anybody's got any questions, I don't know, Percy, if there's any questions in the chat.
Yes, we have some questions in the chat. Before we go into those ones, if anyone wants to ask Rosemary a question directly, if you want to pop your hand up and then you can come off mute. But if not, we can go straight into any questions in the chat. Don't see any hands, but obviously feel free to put your hand up if you do think of something. So we'll go to some of the chat questions. So Alistair has asked, would it be worrying if you saw earthworms on tarmac, or would they be okay and burrow through it?
Well, they'll not be able to burrow through tarmac, but what often happens is that if there's very heavy rain, they come up to the surface, because earthworms can drown if there's heavy rain. And I know after rain, I've got a big sort of manure heap, and the earthworms come out of it like mad when there's heavy rain because it's sitting on a hard surface. So I can kind of go out and gather them all up and put them back on the top again. But they'll not be able to go through tarmac, but they're maybe just making their way from one place to another. So the big risk for earthworms is that they dry out. And if the sun comes up and it's very dry, they'll not make it as far as where they're hoping to get to. So yeah, I think Alistair gave them a wee help and hand there, get them from one side to the other.
And then we have a question from Paul. How important are hedges in protecting soil erosion?
Definitely, yes. And hedges are a fantastic way to protect soil. In terms of, reducing the wind speed, hedges are important to do that. And it can also, if there is erosion, if the soil gets to the hedge, quite often it'll stop moving if it's being washed down by water. So yes, anything with roots, all those hedgerow plants with roots and just the general shelter will definitely help. Just try and keep things as natural as possible, It's when you start taking out hedges and trees and putting in fences on hard surfaces, that's when things get out of balance a bit.
We have another question from Alistair. So he has asked, what do tardigrades eat? He knows it might depend on where they're living, but can you give any examples?
Yeah, they do. They can eat plant material, and they'll also eat smaller animals as well. So they have a little projection that comes out the front. I think it's called a stylus or something like that, and they can pierce the plant or pierce another little microorganism and just suck the contents out. So that they eat lots of different things. So they're very important in recycling nutrients. There's actually, if there's any Star Wars fans, I think is it Star Wars Discovery? Um, there was a creature known as the Ripper. Is any Star Wars fans here? You look it up. The Ripper is actually modeled on a tardigrade, except it's a big giant thing. So yeah, it's definitely got tardigrades characteristics.
Seamus has asked, how strong of a microscope do you need to see some of the soil microorganisms?
Really, you can see some of them with a really good magnifying glass or really any sort of microscope. You'll see something. Some of them are probably too small to pick up, like bacteria would be quite hard to see. But yeah, put it under any type of microscope and you'll definitely find a whole world of things in there. The tardigrades are just about visible because they're just less than a millimeter in size, most of them. So you should be able to see those even just with a magnifying glass. But anything smaller, you're going to need a microscope of some sort.
And Ernie and Ruth have asked, do you think it's true that we only have 100 years of soil use left for farming due to iron panning?
Well, soil degradation in general, which is caused by many things and includes many different things like loss of carbon from the soil, loss of nutrients, mineral nutrients from the soil. It's easy enough to add things like nitrogen and phosphates to the soil, but it's harder to get those minerals into the soil. So yes, they actually think that within the next 25 years, most of the world's soils will be degraded, which is quite frightening really, because you never really hear anybody talking about this. And yet, we talk a lot about pollinators, and we say, oh, without our pollinators, we're not going to get any of our plants pollinated. But if we haven't got soil, we're not going to be able to grow any plants. So yes, I think it is something that really we can't continue to carry on the way we're doing. Governments are going to have to make very, very difficult decisions about how we treat soils, or else, we're not going to have any land to grow stuff in. It's just not going to be possible. Yeah.
Colin has asked, if you wanted to get into soil analysis, where would you start?
Soil analysis. Well, there are some really good online courses that you could try. Online now, you can do virtually anything, and soil analysis would be one of them. There's also perhaps the likes of CAFRE might have some courses going as well. I don't know if CEDAR have run any soil analysis courses, but yeah, I'll have a wee look and see. And if you want to, you can take note of your email and get back to you on that. I'll make a few inquiries about that. But certainly, start with online and see what's on there
And a question from Beverly. What
as
was the
well.
name of the soil survey you mentioned?
There is the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, which is happening in Northern Ireland, and there's nothing like it, I don't think, anywhere else in the world. And this is being run by AFBI, for the Department of Agriculture. And every field in Northern Ireland can be tested. So they're looking at, the soil profile, the nutrients in the soil, and then they provide a printout to farmers. So the farmer can find out, is there, say, too much phosphate in my soil? Am I wasting my money by putting any more on? Or is it deficient in a certain nutrient or a certain mineral? And do I need to supplement them? So the soil nutrient health scheme has been amazing. Yeah, it's a fantastic resource for farmers. It's not available to gardeners though, unfortunately.
And there's a question here from Leah, with some comments before. So a retired greenkeeper told me maybe 10 years ago or more, that him and his colleagues would use rootstock of dead hornbeam to help stabilize the sand dunes. Is this a practice you've heard of or would recommend?
Stabilizing sand dunes. You can certainly help to stabilize sand dunes um by planting marram grass. And that's something that's been happening at Torella Beach. There's been quite a lot of work done to plant marram there to try and stabilize the sand dunes. Yes, you can. You can pile up dead branches and things to try and uh, cut down, the wind speed just to let dunes recover. So yeah, what is it again, Kirsty? Is it planting it or just,
Um, is this a practice you've heard of or would recommend? I just said using rootstock of dead hornbeam to help stabilize the sand dunes.
yeah, yeah, that is something that may be suitable for certain areas. Yeah, we haven't been doing anything like that on the dune systems that we're managing in Ulster Wildlife at Umbra and McGilligan and Ballykinder. We haven't been doing that, but those habitats are being quite well managed. Certainly, Umbra is, really managed quite tightly to, keep the habitat right, and try and keep vehicles, for example, out of the sand dunes. That is one big problem with sand dunes is people going in 4x4s and things like that can cause erosion. But sand dunes are very mobile systems anyway, they can almost form overnight and blow away overnight. So yeah, anything that cuts down the wind if there is a lot of erosion can help, yeah.
And Alistair had asked, what can we do to try and preserve our soil? I know obviously you covered a slide about what we can do at home without, you know, not using pesticides and things. Is there anything else that people can do?
I suppose just really be aware of what the problems are. I think just people just think that soil is just an inert thing, and it's not really all that important. It's something that you use or something that you move around or that you get rid of. I suppose go away and tell people would be good. Find out more about soil. There's lots of resources out there. There's podcasts about soil. There's lots of books about soil now, and just, fly the flag for soil really, because lots of us campaign for woodlands and species-rich grassland and bogs, but we also need to be, looking out for our soil as well, and also supporting regenerative farming if you can. If you do know of any farmers in your area that are using that, or nature-friendly farming, support them. And yeah.
One more question in the chat. Is it a good sign when you see tarmac cracking? Does it mean there's healthy soil even if it's covered?
It could do. It's often due to tree roots, actually. When you see tarmac, especially if you see like a big line, like a ridge coming up on the tarmac, that's often the root of a tree is trying to push up through. But the soil would recover, if we could take the concrete and tarmac away where we don't need it, then the soil will recover in due course. In Finland, I think it was Nina here who works with us was telling me that in Finland, some of the villages have competitions as to who can remove the most concrete. It's actually like a national competition, really, because they've had issues with flooding. And then it's seen that too much concrete is one of the problems. So they've had these competitions to get as much off as can, and the lorries go around and pick it up and weigh it. And then the winning village wins the prize then, who took the most of it away.
Brilliant. Unless anyone has any other question they want to put in the chat or to ask Rosemary directly, we'll maybe finish up. Lots of lovely feedback for you, Rosemary, in the comment section. Everyone seems to have really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.